Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Empowered to Thrive. I'm your host, Corrine Powell, and I'm the owner of Change Radically. In this space, we'll talk all things inner wellness, and parenting will certainly come up too. Because I'm a mom to 4 kids, so parenting is a huge part of my life. This space is designed for safety. Your inner child is welcome. Your past self is invited to listen as well. And no matter what type of day you're having, I want you to know I'm glad to be with you. I live out of vulnerability and transparency, so come and be. Be yourself. Be messy. Invite a friend, and please stay a while. Keep coming back. I want you around. Now, let's jump into today's episode. I am so excited to have you here with me today. I'm also really excited about who else is here with us. Kate House joined me, and she shares about how we can grow from having a fixed to a growth mindset. It was a really fabulous conversation she and I got to have, and I'm excited that you're going to get to listen in and converse with us. I want to tell you a little bit about Kate before we do dive into the conversation. By day, Kate says you can find me running around our small town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania with my 2 little boys as a stay-at-home mom and a wife to my college sweetheart. And by night, I'm the host of the Live by Design podcast. She is many things: a health coach, an educator, a meditation enthusiast, slow but steady runner, and the creator of a woman-focused personal growth group, the LBD Collective. It's Kate's purpose in life to help others release personal growth overwhelm, get unstuck, and finally take the action to launch in the direction of your dreams. Together, Kate says, let's live by design, not default. And with that, let's jump into the conversation.
I'm so excited to be here with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
So I love thinking about mindset as this lens through which we see the world. So I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I had horrible vision. So I remember like in first grade, squinting at the blackboard and being like, hi, can like everyone else see this? Like, what is the point of the blackboard if we can't read it? Right. I remember telling my mom that, and she was like, oh, okay, you can't see, we can fix that. And it didn't even occur to me, like, that wasn't how everyone else experienced the world. I was like, I thought you just can't see very far in the life, right? And then I still have this memory of like going to the eye doctor, sitting down in the big ophthalmologist chair, and they move this huge contraption in front of your eyes. It covers up both your eyes, and it has all these lenses in it. And they flip from one to the other, and they're like, is this one better? Is this one better? And I had this moment of clarity, as a first grader. I'm sitting there, I was like, oh my gosh, I can see again. Like, you do the eye chart exams and you see the letters. And I remember being like, well, I can see the big E, but like, can anyone read the other letters?
Mm-hmm.
And then I go to the eye doctor and I sit in this chair and they put the lenses in front of my eyes. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like my world expanded because I could finally see with clarity. And I like to think of mindset in a really similar way. So our mindset, it acts as this lens through which we see the world. So if we're using a growth mindset, for example, we see opportunities and possibilities. And even when we're met with challenges or resistance or obstacles, we don't see it as a reason to stop necessarily. Maybe we regroup, maybe we pivot, or maybe we just find a different way to get there. Sometimes with this growth mindset, we can envision multiple ways of achieving the same end. And so even when we come across something that's maybe like a stumbling block, we can learn from it and then we can find a different approach. When we think about mindset too, it exists on this continuum. And so I don't know about you, but it can be so easy, especially for us ladies out there, to be perfectionists, right? And for me, for a long time, I fell into that trap of perfectionism, wanting to do everything perfectly or not at all. And sometimes that can lead us to this all or nothing mindset or mentality. And so I think it's a good reminder for us to know that it's okay to be somewhere in the middle, right? Like we don't have to be all in, we don't have to be all out. And that's what I like about talking about mindset, is that it exists on this continuum. So on one side of the continuum, we have the fixed mindset. On one side, we have the growth mindset. And so you're going to fall somewhere in between. You're never going to be 100% growth mindset. You're never going to be 100% fixed mindset, or at least hopefully not. That would not be a very fun way to go through life. And so there are things that we can do to kind of shift us more towards this growth mindset and a little further or farther away, I should say, from this fixed mindset. So with a fixed mindset, this all comes from Carol Dweck. She is an author and a researcher. And she wrote the book called, oh, what is it called? I think it might just be Growth Mindset. I should know this off the top of my head, but she has an incredible book on growth mindset. And she teaches us that with a fixed mindset, you have this assumption that you know what you know and you can't change, right? It's just, it is what it is. And that's how we go through life. But with a growth mindset, we feel like we can grow, we can learn, we can evolve, we can change, we can try new things, and that there are opportunities just to continue developing, right? So instead of being like, it is what it is, it's like, it is what it is right now, but I can keep growing and learning and changing.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that. So I'm curious to know, like, as you listen to this and you think about this fixed mindset and this growth mindset, can you notice ways that might show up in your own life, or do you identify more with one or the other?
Yeah, well, I mean, what you're talking about feels very very relatable, because I grew up with this idea that closer to the fixed mindset, like, this is how we do it. We don't really question it. This is just the way it's been done. This is the way we're going to continue to do it. And then as I have become my own person, and that probably happened a lot later in life than, I would want, say, for my children. I've recognized that is not how I want to live. And the idea that their life is nuanced, that there is so much potential and possibility, and you can create the life you want to have, has allowed me the freedom that comes from moving towards the growth mindset. And as you were talking, that's what I felt too, that idea that there is so much freedom in this. There is so much joy, and life really can look different. Like, the energy of life can be different.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's such, well, to use your word, it's an empowered way of living, right? It's a way of having some agency and not control in like this tight gripped kind of way, but just to get to kind of guide the direction that you're going. And for me, that feels so expansive. That feels exciting. That feels joyful. And it's cool because as you start to develop this growth mindset, a lot of it is done through repetition, right? So it's in having a moment where you realize, like, oh, okay, I've learned about mindset. I have awareness around it now, right? That's always the first step, is creating that awareness. The next step is saying, like, oh, isn't that interesting? I love that line. I learned it from a coach years ago of mine. Oh, isn't that interesting? And then anything can follow that. Oh, isn't that interesting? I'm falling into a fixed mindset right now. Oh, isn't that interesting that like this specific situation makes me fall back into those like all or nothing tendencies, right? Or that perfectionism, or whatever it looks like for you. So we have the awareness. Oh, isn't that interesting, is the second step. And then the third step is like, okay, well, how can I start to shift now that I know that this fixed mindset is rearing its head? How can I really actively and purposely shift? And the cool thing is that a lot of this happens in your brain. And because of neuroplasticity, we can continue learning and changing and creating new neural pathways our entire life. And the brain is kind of like a muscle in that it likes to be, it needs, in order to grow, it needs to be challenged. And we need repetition. So just like the same way, like, I use my free weights to do my curls, like I need to continually move in the direction of a growth mindset. And so with repetition, that gets easier and easier and easier. And eventually it becomes your new kind of default in a good way, like living by design and not by default. It's what I'm all about. And that just helps you. It just becomes easier. And so in the beginning, you might feel a little resistance. You're like, but it's so much easier to be in this like fixed mindset because it's what you know, it's what's comfortable. And that's normal to feel, to not want to leave something that's comfortable. But if you know that there's abundance and joy and excitement and a zest for life, maybe On the other side of that fixed mindset, as you move towards that growth mindset, it gives you the motivation to start making those shifts. And each time you do it, I find there's a little less resistance. It comes to you a little bit more naturally or easily. And eventually, it just becomes part of who you are. And that's the direction we're hoping to go. That's not to say you're never going to like have a day that's challenging. Like for me, if I'm like tired or hungry or heaven forbid both at the same time, it's like a fast track to the to the fixed mindset. I'm like, today is the worst. I hate all people, like, whatever it is. And then I have to be like, oh, okay. I'm just like not taking like I have to take better care of myself. And then all of a sudden things feel better. So you're gonna have days that are challenging or hard. And on those days, those can be the days where it's easier to slip back into those old comfortable patterns of behavior. And if that happens, just be nice to yourself, be kind to yourself, show yourself grace, celebrate how far you've come. And the fact that you even have the awareness or notice that it happened. And then just, again, start where you did before and implement some of those steps to really move towards growth. Does that feel good to you? Does that resonate with you in any way?
Yeah. Especially just how sometimes there's just a really basic reason why we're seeing things the way we're seeing them. Like
Mhm.
there are times for sure where I'm like, yep, just need to take a nap, a quick nap, maybe a long nap if there's time. Just need to pause, remind myself I'm safe in this moment, breathe through it. Like really basic but profound. And
Yeah.
you mentioned that. And I think that is like sometimes we can think, oh, fixed to growth mindset, big things. Yes, maybe, but also very basic and incremental
Mm.
steps and parts to this that matter.
Yes, exactly right. And the cool thing is that those steps that you talk about, they're all things that we're about to dive into, and you can start to implement them. Well, one, right away, and two, for free. I think sometimes, we think about these huge monumental shifts, right? And we're like, well, then I have to invest in a coach, or I have to join a program, or I have to read like 20 personal growth books, or whatever it is, right? And so much of this we can do in our own hearts and minds and bodies through going for walks, through getting quiet, through journaling, through meditating, through prayer, whatever that looks like for you. So this is just like a little disclaimer that like, if this resonates with you, like start to take action and follow some of these steps and give yourself permission to show up and do it kind of messy, right? Like I'm all about imperfect action. There's this Ed Milet quote, and he says, imperfect action beats perfect inaction every time. And I love that line because I was queen of like perfect inaction for a very long time. And then eventually I was just like, forget it. I'm just going to show up and like figure it out as I go. Half the time I feel like I'm building an airplane that's already in flight, but that's okay because eventually you figure it out, right?
Yeah. No, that's good. I'm taking a quick moment, interrupting the episode to let you know about an upcoming group session that I am hosting. It will be all about how to deal with difficult family members, difficult people that you have to interact with over the holiday season. We will meet via Zoom, so come from the comfort of your own home. Join us live if you want to be able to participate, ask your questions, chime in and talk about your experiences, or watch the replay if this time doesn't work well for you. We'll be meeting on Thursday evening, November 16th from 7:15 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Only $25 to save your spot, and I would love to have you there. Link in the bio. Can you say that one more time?
Imperfect action beats perfect inaction every single time.
We just need to sit with that for a second, absorb that, because that is so good.
Right?
So good for us to hear.
Yeah, because how often do we tell ourselves like we can't do the thing or follow the desire on our heart, which is valid for you and worthy of pursuit because it's there and it's there for a reason, and we don't pursue it because we worry about showing up imperfectly. And actually, I have a tattoo on my wrist that says "Do it scared," and for me, doing something imperfectly for a long time scared me. Like it just scared me. I was like, I don't want to do it. I want to feel perfectly prepared for everything, right? But that's just not realistic. Plus, I have like 2 little kids and a husband and 2 dogs, right? Like, so everything has to be done imperfectly for me, at least right now. Well, but imperfectly. And so instead of beating myself up over these little imperfections, it's like, well, let's celebrate what we did. Let's celebrate what was accomplished or experienced. Doesn't even have to have like a something that can be judged or anything by anyone else. Like, did you just enjoy the experience of it, right? And so there's 5 ways that we can start to make this shift. So friend, if you're listening and you're like, okay, I identify that at times I fall into this fixed mindset, and you have that desire to move more towards growth, of seeing abundance and opportunity, there are 5 things that we can do. The first thing is to challenge your limiting beliefs. So a limiting belief typically is something you believe about yourself that might not necessarily be true. So it could look like something like saying, I'm not a math person. And so you just decide like, well, I'm just never going to have finances that are in order because I'm not a math person, right? When in reality, like either you could get help, right? You could get an accountant maybe, or a friend or a partner who's trustworthy and good with numbers, or you can learn. And that's the thing with the growth mindset is we have this opportunity to say like, I might not know it now, but I can learn. I can educate myself, and you can find ways to learn that resonate with you. Maybe you like YouTube videos. Maybe you like to read books. Maybe you listen to audiobooks. Maybe you listen to podcasts like this one, right? Like you can find the learning style that resonates with you and lean into that. And one thing I like to do is to take a self-limiting belief and turn it into like a self-worth statement. So that way, when you hear that self-limiting belief of like, for example, for me, I've run like 14 half marathons and a marathon. I haven't run one in a few years since having kids and all of that good stuff. But for a long time, I told myself, like, well, I'm not a real runner, was what I told myself, because I'm not a fast runner. And so I thought I wasn't a real runner because I wasn't a fast runner. And because of that, I would show up on race day having trained for 12 weeks, and I'm not racing against anyone else. I'm like the tortoise and the hare. Like, I'm not going to win the race, but like one day I'll win my age group when I'm like 80 and I'm the only person on the course. Like, that's my approach, like longevity. And I would show up feeling like a little defeated. I'd like look around and see all these people who looked like, quote, traditional runners, right? And I'm like, oh, like, and so I think to myself, like, well, I'm not a real runner, which is like the worst way to start a 13-mile run. And instead, I've learned like to create a self-worth statement instead. So I would say, like, I am a real runner. I have done the training. I love to run for the sake of like running and the joy that it brings me, right? So just flipping that statement on its head, taking the time to really think about like, is this actually true? Like, if I was going out there and like breaking bones or like, like something ridiculous where it's like, okay, no, maybe I actually shouldn't be a runner. Maybe this is telling me something and I should listen to my like intuition, but I love running. And so for me, it was like, okay, well, how can we turn this into something positive? So there's so many different ways that this feeling of a self-limiting belief can show up in your own life. And so your self-worth statement is going to be very individual and unique to you. But what I would encourage you to do is take a little bit of time to journal it out, to mull it over, go on a walk and ponder it if that's more your speed. And start to think through like, what is that self-limiting belief? A time when you tell yourself like can't, won't, not able, like those kind of negative self-sabotaging things that happen in our minds, and then turn it into something more positive. And that's another way that we can kind of work on this neuroplasticity of allowing our brains to help us is by when that self-limiting belief comes up, tell yourself that self-worth statement and then do something that is supportive of that self-worth statement and that will continue to reinforce in you that you are, worthy, capable, whatever that word is for you. Is there like a limiting belief that comes to mind for you?
Yeah. As you were talking, actually, you had finished, and I was thinking, oh, yeah. I remember I used to struggle. I probably still struggle, but it was like a regular on repeat struggle with this statement I would say out loud. I can't do this in the middle of the chaos with the kids, in the middle of the stress of something, in the middle of the mundane parts of life, right? I would verbally say it. I can't do this. And then I recognized, okay, that's how I felt, even like my inner child, like, this is too hard and I can't do this. But the reality was I was actually doing it. So I felt like I can't, but I'm doing it. So I kind of rephrased it to, this is hard, but I am doing it.
Yes.
Because for me, it was literally, I was saying the opposite of what I was walking in with that, like the cognitive dissonance there. It didn't make it once it came to the light and I was able to actually witness myself in it. I'm like, oh yeah, but here I am plugging through the muck. So I might as well pat myself on the back. It's hard, Kareen, but you're doing it.
Yeah.
And it's things like that that sometimes are what you're talking about. Like for me, it was really a powerful thing to just switch the script there to really the truth of it.
Yeah. Like, but what if I can actually do this? What if I can? What if I am? That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. These limiting beliefs can be so personal. They're usually things that we like tell ourselves when maybe we don't even verbalize, but when we can start to recognize them and move through them, it's really amazing how you can feel on the other side. And again, not to say that it's never going to happen again, right? When you're in a whirlwind of like kids and chaos and what have you, but then you say it, you have that moment of like, oh, okay, I'm noticing that I'm slipping into this again. And then you can come back to that self-worth statement. So our first way of shifting to the growth mindset, challenging our limiting beliefs. The second way is facing our fears. Now, I don't mean like you have a fear of sharks and you're going to go jump into like a shark tank. Like, I mean, if that's your fear, you do you, girl. But most it's like a fear of failure or a fear of success that leads to like self-sabotage. Maybe it's a fear of being imperfect. A big one that I hear a lot with my clients is a fear of being judged, a fear of showing up and worrying about what that person from high school might think of you and what you posted online or what you're doing with your life or, whatever. A fear of being judged by family members, friends. Sometimes it's just a fear of being judged by just anyone, right? Maybe someone you don't even know. And so facing your fears of just taking that moment of sitting with that and asking yourself, like, why is this something that I fear? You mentioned inner child work. Maybe it's some inner child work that you move through. It could be working with a therapist. I mean, there's so many different ways of like thinking about this, but I think the easiest thing is just thinking about like, where are those areas where I feel fear? I feel stuck. When I think about how it feels in your body, I like curl in on myself, right? My shoulders curl in, my chest feels a little tight. Like what manifests like that in your body, and start to think through that and start to think like, okay, what are ways that I can start to face this fear? So for me, like showing up imperfectly or a fear of being judged was like, okay, well, like I'm now a podcaster with like over 260 episodes. So like, I am sure I have been judged and I've had to get to a point where I'm just like, I am who I am and I'm just going to own it. And if it doesn't resonate with somebody and they judge me, it's okay. Like it's going to happen. But I feel good stepping into this authentic way of being me and teaching and sharing and getting to learn and nurture others. And that is more important to me than that fear of judgment. Does that feel right to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's wild, that fear, those facing those fears. So our first way, addressing your limiting beliefs. Second way, facing your fears. Third way is shifting your perspective. And this is another one that can feel like so big, right? It's like, oh my gosh, my perspective, that feels huge. But I love this approach that James Clear teaches in Atomic Habits. And it's this idea of just like 1% better every day. And so can you shift your perspective by 1% shifts? So if you find yourself just like feeling really negative or doubting yourself or, whatever that case might be, just shifting by 1%, right? Maybe it's creating that awareness around it, thinking something different. Maybe it's choosing to go for a walk when you're feeling frustrated instead of like blowing up or holding the resentment inside. Like, can you process it? Can you move your body and process those feelings? 1% better for me looks like waking up when my alarm actually goes off. So I actually have the time to go through the morning routine with my children and not feel rushed. My kids, my oldest, bless his heart, born on his due date, loves to be punctual. He like to this day, he's like almost 6 years old. He hates to be late. He hates to feel rushed. Like it makes him really anxious. And so for me, like 1% better is like, okay, I get up when my alarm goes off so we can have this kind of restful start to the day, or we can ease into the day without being like, quick, put your shorts on, quick, get your backpack,
Yeah,
right?
I get it.
Oh my gosh, yeah, this poor child. He's like, are we in a rush? No, baby, we're good. And so sometimes that's like that 1% better, right? Or it's packing his lunch the night before so I can start the next day proactively instead of reactively. And so for me, that's a big part of living by design and not by default is implementing these 1% shifts, layering in one more habit, right? Like as we record this, I've got like my massive water bottle and I drink 3 of these a day because I know when I hydrate well, my brain fog goes away, my body feels better, I'm hydrated for my workouts, like all good things, right? And that's like a 1% shift of just like, okay, I'm just going to get a bigger water bottle and I'm going to refill it up a couple
Yeah.
times, right? So our first way, challenge your limiting beliefs. Second way, face your fears. Third, shift your perspective by just 1 degree. And the third is to change your self-talk. This kind of relates a little bit to challenging our limiting beliefs, but all of us can have this inner critic in our minds. So when I think about changing your self-talk, I think about, there's a Brene Brown quote. She talks about speaking to yourself the way that you would to a friend. And if you ever find yourself with your inner dialogue being harsh, critical, unkind, holding yourself to unrealistic standards, sometimes that can be our inner critic. And this inner critic is never satisfied. The inner critic is always there to kind of bring you down. The inner critic could be your own voice. It could be the voice of a parent, a previous partner, a boss. I mean, the inner critic can come from so many different places. But there are things that we can do to shift more towards what I think of as an inner coach. And so having moments where like, yeah, maybe we try something and it fails. Like maybe we try something and we think it's going to be like the greatest thing, right? Since sliced bread. And then we're like, nope, that, that was just not great, right? Like the intention was there, but the execution or whatever was lacking. And the inner critic could say like, well, you're a failure. Who are you to even try? You're not smart enough to do this. Like there's so many, our inner critic can be so mean. And our inner coach can just be like, you know what? That maybe that was a failure, but what can we learn from it? How can we fail forward? Or what is something positive that came from this experience, right? Like maybe you tried doing something, it didn't go as planned, but you created a new friend along the way. Or you read a book in preparation for something that was really pivotal for you as a person, right? So there are these ways of just making these subtle changes from that inner critic to that inner coach. Do you feel that like inner critic, inner coach inside of you too?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're talking my language because anyone
Yeah.
who listens regularly to me is hearing, this type of content we're talking about. So I totally resonate. And just even sitting on the other end listening, like as you're talking about, oh, the way the inner critic sounds, like it's just, yeah, it just reminds me like how harsh, how unkind it is until we recognize that like we don't have to listen to that voice,
Right.
that we can become the inner coach, that this is a learned way of thinking and an internalized voice. So oh yeah, I appreciate what you're saying because we all need to hear it. We need to be reminded, we need to hear it again.
Yeah, exactly right. And you make such a good point too, that like you don't have to trust what your inner critic is saying. Like just because you have a thought doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Right. So sometimes we have to we have to look at like the quote evidence and be like, is this factual? Am I a failure? Like, do I suck? Like, probably not, like, and we can look at the evidence, be like, no, like I achieved this, or I did this and it felt really good, or I did this thing and I volunteered and I supported other people, right? There's a way to shift to that inner coach. And that's just another way of shifting towards that growth mindset, towards that abundance. And then our final way of shifting towards that growth mindset is getting support. I think being in community, finding accountability, being a lifelong learner, listening to podcasts like this, right? I like to say that there are people out there who are my mentors who don't know I exist, but I read their books, I listen to their podcasts, I watch their TED Talks, right? Like, and I learn from them actively. And they become like a mentor of sorts, even if like Mel Robbins doesn't know I exist, it's okay, right? And so getting support. So for some people, support might look like, talking to a therapist or talking to somebody who can help you kind of unpack some of those things from the past. Maybe it looks like working with a coach. For me, like my coaching practice is very future focused for me. And so it's like, okay, where am I today? Where do I want to go? What are the strategies I can implement to get there? Maybe it's being in a community of like-minded people. Not that everyone has to look alike, believe alike, think alike, but for me, like I have a group coaching program called the LBD Collective or the Live by Design Collective. And our common thread is we are all trying to live by design and not by default, right? We're leaning into intentional living. We're leaning into our sense of purpose. We're leaning into gratitude and joy. And those are the things that bring us together, right? And so that's kind of just like, that's my favorite way of shifting towards a growth mindset. So you can surround yourself with people like by joining an actual group or collective, but you could surround yourself by listening to this podcast. You can surround yourself by choosing what you read really intentionally. You can surround yourself by watching a documentary. There's so many ways that you can be in community, that we can all find a way that works for us. If big groups feel kind of scary for you, maybe it's one specific friendship, right? Or one specific coach, one specific podcaster. But that community piece is huge. We're not meant to do this life alone. And so let's stop trying to hold all of it by ourselves and link arms with others. And so those are the 5 ways that I like to cultivate a growth mindset: challenging limiting beliefs, facing your fears, shifting your perspective, shifting to that inner coach, and getting support and community.
It's great. It's practical. We can all take and do something with what we've heard. So I love that.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much. Well, I could geek out over growth mindset all day, but I do have a special gift for all of your listeners. If anybody would like to jump into my Pursue Your Purpose Masterclass, it's a $97 course, but if you use code Empowered to Thrive, no surprise there, you can get it for free. So it has about, I think, 14 modules. Each module is very short to watch, and every module has some journaling prompts or some worksheets to help you do some of this inner work. We talk a lot about those self-worth statements, I am statements, getting clear on our core values, debunking this feeling that like purpose is really big and scary and making it much more accessible. And we talk about mindset as well. And so if there's anyone listening who is like, this was helpful or this was encouraging or this was uplifting and you want to dive in even more, that's available for you too.
Awesome. And I will include that link in the show notes for them. And where can everyone find you if they want to, do more or just interested? They're just
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes. So I am online. My website is Miss Kate House. I guess there's another Kate House out there in the world. And she got that first. So mine is Miss Kate House. So MS Kate House, just like a house.com. That's also my Instagram handle. I'm over on Instagram. And then you can tune into the Live by Design podcast, because I'm all about living by design and not by default, helping women get unstuck, ditch the overwhelm, and take action in the direction of their dreams. And we do that every week over on the Live by Design podcast.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
If you enjoyed today's episodes, I want to highlight a few previous ones I've recorded that touch on components of what Kate and I talked about today. From Season 2, Episode 18, Hold That Thought, and Take 2. From Season 4, Episode 7, An Example of Self-Parenting. And from Season 5, Episode 10, What is Important to Healing. Here we are. We've come to the end of another episode. Sit back and reflect on what you heard. What's the one thing that resonates with you that you can take away and do something with? Let's not just listen. Let's listen and take action. Now, action may look very different for us, but it's doing something with what we hear. I hope that you'll share today's episode with a friend that you think would also enjoy it. And please come back next week. I hope that you have a fabulous week and that you remember when you pillow your head at night, when you're going through your days, that who you are is good. And I'm glad that you're alive.